Delighted to be with us on our final panel. And I think we have all of our participants on the line, although I can't see folks' faces at the moment. But our final panel of the day, we are going to be discussing mental health. And the context here, I think it's, for those of you who have been with us all day, Anya mentioned earlier, we have seen the rates of folks identifying with a mental health condition really skyrocket. And I think a big part of that can be attributed absolutely to the pandemic. A big part of it, more positively, can be attributed to better awareness of mental health conditions and what they mean, and people getting tested and treated, et cetera. And finally, I think most optimistically is we're seeing that the stigma around mental health is very, very slowly receding. And so we'd like to be a part of that movement. That's obviously a positive. If what gets measured gets done. If you don't know it, you can't fix it, all that good stuff. And so, this panel, the folks we brought together, have all agreed to be a little bit maybe uncomfortably personal, while also talking about trends in this space. Fabulous. So why don't we start off with, and I think maybe we can go to the panel view. Because I would actually like to do something a little bit different. I'm going to have each of our panelists introduce themselves. So maybe give us 30 seconds just on who you are, what you do, and where you're dialing in from. And maybe Ryan, could we start with you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm Ryan Haddon. I am a certified life coach, hypnotherapist, a facilitator of breath and sound and meditation. And I work privately. I'm one-on-one. I have global clients all over the world. And then I also have do corporate wellness. So I go into companies to create mindfulness practices and to be able to talk about the things that we're going to be talking about today. So it's very, very important. And it's my honor to be in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Sulafa, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Sulafa Saeed Salim. I am the Senior Advisor for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at the Mozilla Foundation. Mouthful, as when you always have these big titles for some reason. I have the pleasure of having worked internationally supporting social impact, digital work in Europe, Africa, as well as Asia, and currently based out of Canada. And a lot of my focus is really thinking about harm reduction and harm-aware organizations and how we can really think about how we center the human experiences and really create narratives and voices to the equity space. So that's me, in short.
Fabulous. Genevieve, do you want to go next?
Absolutely. I'm Genevieve Bonet. I'm a managing director and partner with the Boston Consulting Group, where I do a number of different things. One of them is to lead our public sector practice, but I'm also one of the champion in mental health and well-being, as well as diversity and inclusion. My journey and passion with diversity, inclusion, and mental health and well-being stems from my personal experience. I was one of the first women to serve in a combat role with our Royal Canadian Navy when there were no women on those ships. And then this became a little bit of a passion of mine to use my professional platform to study what this is all about. And then today work with organization in establishing culture change program and all sorts of things such that they can become more inclusive, equitable organization, and they can reduce the harm that potentially can be created to their employees. And I'm absolutely delighted to be with you today.
Very impressive. Thank you. Last but not least, Kunal.
Hi, everyone. I'm the founder of We the Planet. I also work with the Chopra Foundation as the Chief Impact Officer. My life's journey has always been focused on mental health, longevity, and leadership. I'm honored to be here and contribute to the conversation.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to dive right in. First things first, as I mentioned, we're going to get a bit personal, including me, so I'm not off the hook. I want to start by saying I don't think any of you did yourselves justice in your introduction. So these are, three of the most, frankly, impressive people that I've had the pleasure of working with. All of you are at the top of your fields, interestingly, different fields. But having spoken with each of you, everybody has a history. So to the extent that you're comfortable, would love to hear kind of any personal experience. What drew you to the mental health space? What kind of drove your passion to work in this field?
Do you want me to start?
Please, thank you.
Mhm. Well, going back to my experience in serving in the Canadian Armed Forces, I didn't serve for a very long time. But when I released from the forces, my career officer said, don't forget where you came from, and please try to remember those who will go in combat and will be affected in many different ways. And over the last 35 years, I have observed, firsthand the harm that can be imposed on people that are on the front line, whether they are in the military, frontline workers, police officers, you name it. And I have always felt that it was my duty to go and do whatever I could in order to, help them reduce the harm that's been imposed on them for the circumstances of the jobs that they have. And I think like my position in being so passionate about mental health and well-being also comes from being a people leader. And you mentioned COVID, Laura. I mean, in COVID, I saw terrible things. I was doing the culture transformation for the Canadian Armed Forces. And unfortunately, what I saw experience with working with my clients was a tremendous increase in number of suicide. And the list goes on, substance abuse and whatnot. And as a people leader, I kind of want to make sure that I'm always providing that safe environment for the people that, report to me, and hopefully I'm doing an okay job. And that's sort of what, drives me to really focus on that every day.
That's really powerful. Thank you, Jen. And thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you.
Would anyone, I'm happy to go too, but would anyone else like to jump in?
I'm happy to. So I started my career being a communications manager for an organization that worked with African women scientists across Africa. It was a fascinating experience, that conversion of like pipeline management for women who often people are not seen as. Africa has had some of the biggest vice chancellors in universities, more than the Western world. There's a lot of mythology about that. But working in different spaces has also told me about my positionality and my privileges, right? Whether it's going to private schools as an international school kid, but also being positionally a racialized kid going to private schools in different contexts, also coming from a lower income background in context of privilege and positionality. I say this to say is that we often forget that, we flex our identities when we exist in different spaces. But when I moved to the UK, I had an experience of workplace bullying, and it took me a long time to actually assess what happened. And I had to come down to the fact that it was racialized workplace bullying. It actually took me out of the workplace. It was the first time I actually had a conversation with myself about anxiety and what it was doing to me. And the fact that in context of workplace bullying, often it's exactly manifests the same way that it does when you're a child, right? That people don't advocate, the channels are not there, nobody actually wants to take space. Because of fear of them being also pushed away, but also bystander effect is a real thing, right? We see things often. We hear many stories of that. So it got me into the journey of really thinking about how does wellness present in the organization? How does mental health really present in an organization? And we often talk about mental health as if it's outside of disability. It is a disability. And then with that, how are the supports actually structured, right? We can't separate it from any inclusion or equity conversation, because often those who are the most marginalized often have the greatest risk in workplaces to be impacted by mental health, right? And so there's the well-being component of it, but there's the mental health component, which is truly deeply a disability. And when we elevate it like that, we actually start to tackle it in a really aggressive way. And for me, that has been like the bloodline in understanding that in all these different identities that we can hold, we must actually realize that they're human stories and they're real impacts. So for me, that is a very direct and correlative story of how I ended up working in the space that I do.
Thank you, Salafa, and so powerful. Mental health, it is a condition, and conditions can be treated and they can be supported. And I think sometimes in workplaces we forget that. So that's really helpful. Ryan, are you happy to share, or shall I share my story?
Sure. Hello again. I found myself maybe 20 some years ago at the end of my ability to be able to cope and manage life on life's terms, as they say. And I had anxiety. I had some untreated trauma. I had a lot of different things going on. And on top of that, I had had a spiritual awakening. And at 17 in India. So I couldn't reconcile all of these mental health issues and untreated other issues and the spiritual through line that I had. And I actually fell upon a few mentors that took advantage. And so it put me on very, very shaky ground. And I wasn't able to, the mentors weren't there, weren't able to hold the line. And that is a particularly devastating thing. It's like a spiritual betrayal, if you will. So it became very, very important to me to, when I did finally get well and be able to build my life back in a foundation that was solid, to seek out mentors that were in integrity with their messaging and with their practices. And so I got very good at that. So that's one of the upsides of having gone through something like that, a rite of passage for me, if you will. But I found myself 20 years ago dealing with things to be able to cope with this anxiety and this just unchecked emotion. That's what it felt like, just overwhelm. And because I didn't have many tools. So what I reached for was substances and alcohol. And I found myself very quickly, so I'm grateful for that. It was a very quick bottom and very acute in the throes of this terrible, terrible affliction. And I finally was ready that these are these things we don't know. They're kind of difficult to pinpoint why, when, how, but I was, and I climbed through a window of grace. And on the other side, I was met with incredible teachers who were in integrity with what they were teaching, and I was able to build my life back. And from there, I had such an appreciation for those mentors. And I started using hypnosis and many different modalities and tools. And they were really helped me to leverage myself out of this particularly dark place where nothing else could. And so I started working with women in recovery. And that through line of service was really what felt like a life raft, helping others, turning around, learning something, turning around and giving it back and seeing them improve. It's a very beautiful process. And so I worked with these women in recovery and found it was the thing I was the most happy doing. And so from there, I became a life coach. I became a hypnotherapist because I am so in awe of the subconscious mind and how we can close loops in patterns and behaviors by working with the subconscious. So that became that. And then the meditation I've been meditating for 30 years, even through the dark times. That always held me in good stead. Somehow it made it less dark, if you will. So it did work, and I'm grateful for that. And then sound, I'm a sound practitioner. So I work with bowls, all sorts of instruments, because not everyone wants to meditate. Not everyone wants to do breath work. And not everyone is willing to do sound. So it's like, where can I meet my clients? Where can I meet people when they are ready to learn tools to be able to self-regulate, to be able to come back home to themselves, to be able to pull in all their parts that are scattered through their productivity, through the intensity of this particular time on the planet. And so this is my mission, it feels, in this time, to be able to meet people right in that place and say, how about this? How about emotional freedom technique? I have all these tools in my toolbox that I've amassed over 20 plus years in recovery and also in this space, to be able to help people to be able to come home to themselves. I don't know how else to say it, but it really feels like that when something clicks into place and we find ourselves in different seasons in our life. And so what might have worked in one season doesn't work in another. And so it's being curious and flexible. And someone earlier talked about, what was it? It was self-evaluations. And I'm very big on that, on taking, being able to work with our self-talk, because the self-talk, if it's not positive, it's going to grind you into the ground. And in my case, led me right into the throes of addiction. So it's really the current underneath everything. So starting to notice how we speak to ourselves, how we evaluate ourselves, through what lens, through what filter. It's usually very harsh, and it's usually on the value of productivity. And so I like to slow things down. And that's really, I work with companies to do that. And I also consult and I, work one-on-one. That's the heart of my practice. So thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Really, really moving stories. I identify with all of them. And one thing, and I came prepared to speak about my personal experience. I did notice my mother is on the line, so I just want to caveat, Mom, I'm fine. So I'm going to tell my story, but please don't worry. So for me, and one thing that we talked about, Ryan, in the pre-call was my mental health. My lowest mental health was when I was at the zenith of my career. And so I went through a period when we did we raised a whole bunch of venture capital. Business was going great. We were growing. I had just moved to a new city. It was very exciting. And I found myself very depressed and very anxious and very in denial about kind of what was going on. And so I didn't treat it. I didn't ask for support. I didn't ask for flexibility. And I felt as a leader, I have to be strong and I have to be online 20 hours a day and I have to be there for my team. And by the way, was very kind of encouraging of my team members to be honest and transparent and forthright and ask for support when they struggled with exactly what I was going through. But for some reason, I didn't feel that I deserved that same grace. And ironically, what I found was when I was transparent with people, my coworkers, my colleagues, even my clients about what I was going through, not only was I able and very privileged to access that support, but I actually created more comfort and more space for them to be open about what they were struggling with. And in that way, I think, my team will hopefully keep me honest, but we've evolved the norms in our organization. It's pretty common for someone to call me and say, hey, I'm having an anxious episode. I'm having a depressed episode. I need some time. I need some, flexibility. But I found my vulnerability as a leader was really essential in that outcome. But maybe moving on, I'd love to turn individually to some of you working again in very different ways. Kunal, I'd love to start with you. Have had the honor of attending a couple really inspiring events that you've organized at the UN. Talk to us about, globally, internationally, what you're seeing in terms of attention towards mental health, how people are approaching it, et cetera.
Well, before I started all this, I was a psychologist and a global health scientist in training. I think the story of mental health has improved, but the actual access to mental health has stayed the same. I feel like the bottom billion suffer the most. I actually believe that even the top billion suffer the most too, meaning there's a strange way in which this one thing affects everyone and there's not enough help. Because the narrative that perceives most societies, is you've got to toughen up, grow up, let go, and not look at your mental health as an illness or a disorder, but more like a passing cloud. So for me, what I've seen, while there's been a lot of narrative around mental health and a lot of interest in mental health, the actual systemic approach towards that has largely stayed the same. Now, in that fashion, I think they're the rare gems like Ryan and them who are doing the work, who are helping people do the inner work, which is most important. And they don't have as much support as I feel should be given as the medical system does, for example. So for me, I'd like to see a lot more support financially as well as systems-wise, just access to people like Ryan. So she's not like a hidden secret amongst her tribe or her community. And to have Ryan have the ability, also the opportunity to train mini Ryans, in the world. And I feel like that's where, Sulefa speaks to the diversity and inclusion opportunity. And of course, vets, to me, is a great example of where mental health matters, and we've failed by a lot, as far as veterans are concerned. Even though there's a lot being done with canines and different kinds of modalities to support them, it's not enough. So for me, that's where I've seen, while there's been progress, it's been more of a narrative of optics versus true systems transformation and a paradigm shift towards making healthcare the same, mental health, the same priority as healthcare. Treating cancer of the mind just like you would cancer of the body. Because really speaking, you may not suffer, visibly, and you may not see the effects, but mental health can actually kill you in an instant. In fact, at an alarming rate, people are dying, in Gen Z especially, because of mental health, the crisis of mental health, not because of disease. They don't have relationships, they have situationships. This is a new word I just learned. And it's so fascinating that there's this whole new era that's being socially engineered by social media, right? Where people are losing their identity in order to really preserve their social influence. And they're not able to really tap into the age-old question of who am I, and unable to really identify with the deeper parts of their being. So for me, I'd like to see that happen. I'd like to see as much of a shift in mental health happen as it has happened in, formidable and evidence-based science-backed medicine.
Really, really helpful. And I'm reminded, and I'm going to maybe move to Salafa next, because I think your comments will be on point. But I'm reminded, Kunal, of the event that you hosted with Sophie Trudeau, and we were chatting about, yes, mental health is a disease and it is a condition, but it's not being treated. What institution is stepping up to provide support? Because thus far, it hasn't really been government. And so, Salafa, maybe turning to you, I'd love to hear from you kind of, you have such a worldly view of these issues. Number one, any commentary on, the intergenerational and intersectional impacts of mental health conditions? And number two, what have you seen organizations do to step up and provide support?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. And thank you, Kunal, for the walkthrough. I think it's really helpful to ground us in the global context. So I work from a disability justice framework, right? And so that's the idea that it's not institutions, but you yourself understand your body, right? If the social model of disability, meaning I know that I'm neurospicy, therefore I don't. One of the concerns often is that in a medical model, it is that you have to identify yourself as somebody who has something and put your organization on notice in order to get the resources to support you. Now, if you use a social model, it's the understanding that you have community care that understands you intimately. You have a leader that understands. So Genevieve, you actually had the great example where people can lean in and say, hey, not a great day, right? Can I tap out? We live in a world with a lot of friction. Things are impacting us from the familial level to the global scale, right? Things are having very residual impacts. And we know that COVID actually has a lot of people who are not addressing or not recognized as COVID long haulers because there are not systems in place to actually support them. The mental health component, then there's the physical. So from an organizational angle, what I often tell people, some of the greatest practices I've seen are things like duvet days. These are days that are allocated to say, I'm tapping out. You don't have to explain to your boss what it is. We call it like floating days as well. Things that don't have a stigma associated to it. But you can, let's say somebody drops in and say, you know what, I'm clocking on a duvet day. It could be that you wanted a sick day. It could be anything. It's just that you want to chill, right? One of those. The other thing is actually giving people space, a floating time off. So one of the great things we do at Mozilla Foundation is every Friday in the summer, we have Summer Fridays. It alleviates and we scale our workloads to that. And it really allows us to empower people to take a beat, right? To be present for their day-to-day life. One of the hard parts is balancing. I don't really believe in work-life balance. I think that pursuit is like this perfectionist model where there's flows, but allowing people to attribute the necessary attention that they would like to give to whatever they think is necessary. So giving people respite to take the summer to be with their kids. And a lot of them floated around statutory holidays. So people got 4-day long weekends, right? So creates freedom like that. The other thing I really think about is we also create safe spaces around things that are happening. So if there are things that are globally happening, for instance, a little bit of respite, wellness Wednesdays, all those things, and particularly when one of the organizations I worked for had a week-long mental health summit where this is a 6,000 person corporation. We stopped everything. We had meditation, we had DJ sets, all virtual, right? And it gave people the ability to drop in and out. Giving people resources are key about that. But also one of the things that we've done at our organization is to really start at an educational level, right? Starting to teach people about what is a mental health condition. People don't understand the varied aspects. There's episodic disabilities, there's chronic. So somebody who might have depression might have a very different relationship to somebody who might have postpartum depression. What is that conversation? What are the resources? How do you check in with yourself? So I think there's application and education, right? And I think it is the responsibility of an organization to create a system that the person who is going through things or has been going through things, because those are both realities, that they don't have to, the labor should not be on the person who is struggling to identify themselves, but rather that the system creates levers that they can access resources without having to deal with the social stigmas, right? Because there is a stigma and we can't lie about that, right? Saying that you are somebody who suffers with anxiety, they are perceptions of productivity in an organization, that you're having a lazy day off, right? There is that. We haven't moved so far away from that. We have language, but we don't have, there's still an aspect of performance management in organization, right? So how do we reduce the test of whether I'm a fit employee is to actually create the actual tools for people to access it without having to put the organization on notice.
Really, really interesting stuff. And I think a theme that came through earlier is you don't know what you don't know. And often leaders think that their corporate culture is one thing, but really it's another. So I think also getting feedback very anonymously, safely from employees on, is there a stigma? What does that look like? Helps you gain an understanding of, okay, how much, proactive messaging and support do we need to be providing? And usually it's more than you would think. Maybe moving to Jen. So Jen, I feel like all you've done is work with extremely high performing teams. Maybe talk to me, not to put you on the spot, but as a very senior leader at BCG, previously at McKinsey, PwC, talk to me about, and I've experienced it, I used to work at one of those firms. Talk to me about, in a high pressure environment, how have you provided support, or what kind of programs, interventions have you seen that were effective or not effective, and we can learn from?
Absolutely. And I'll start by saying I kind of made it all about everybody else when I actually shared my why I care about mental health and well-being, but I really appreciate my panel colleagues and been very vulnerable. So I am not infallible. I've had my moments. My son is actually on this Zoom, and I'm going to say, like you, Laura, I'm okay. But there's times that I was actually not okay. All of us, regardless of how resilient we might be, actually have had low points. I certainly have had mine. I mean, the good thing is I had some people that supported me and being able to kind of get, from the bottom all the way back to a normal place. But the high performing environments, and especially project team, is something that firms like McKinsey or PwC or BCG spend a lot of time on. And one of the things that is very specific is bringing the teams as they form together and creating team norms. So, and what that means is not just talking about the work plan and what we're going to do and, what are the key milestones. It's about actually going around and saying, like, what is going on in your life? Right now, how do you actually want to work? I mean, are you somebody who likes to wake up early in the morning or work late at night? Would you like, do you have any specific challenges that are going on right now? How can you best be supported? So on and so forth. So at the beginning of every new project, we call them cases, we bring the team together and we get them to lay out and write down what all these things are. Now, what gets surveyed gets done. So on a weekly basis, on a Friday afternoon, people get pinged and say, like, did the team actually abide by the team norms? And there's a bunch of different questions. The managing partner who's responsible for that case team will get an alarm system going on. And it's unfortunate, it's always at the end of the day on Friday, saying you have one of your case team that's not doing well based on the measures. There's an external coach that gets involved at the beginning in establishing the team norms, but at the minute that there's a red flag, the team is convened first thing on Monday morning and gets to be addressing, like, what are the things specifically that are leading to people not feeling well. And they're very simple questions. They come up on your phone and you can answer, through an app. And I think that, the as one intervention, specifically for people who work in project teams, it's a very effective one because it opens up the dialogue. It provides people with a safe environment to be able to lay out some of the challenges that they have. It is an ongoing dialogue. So it's not just at the beginning, at the middle, or at the end. It does get addressed. It gets addressed, objectively. And I mean, I could talk about all the wonderful things that do get like done and some specific measures, but I just want to take it like for 30 seconds to a macro level. So consulting in organizations, when I say like, okay, so what can you do to move the needle forward on being, better for our employees? There's really 4 things that need to be addressed. And the first one is around prioritizing mental health and well-being, but really walking the talk. And this is about, making this an imperative and understanding why it matters so much, because, it's different for every organization, whether it's about productivity or reducing number of suicide or workplace injuries or whatever that might be. The second thing is really important is you have to invest in the leaders, the people who are responsible for the people. And when I say leader, I don't say VP or, CEO or anything like that. If you're a mom, you're a people leader. I happen to be the people leader of 4 beautiful children. If you have responsibility over individuals, you are a people leader. And you have to form them into becoming generative leader. So in leadership, there's like the heads, the hand, and the heart. The head, think about it as strategic planning, action, sort of establishing business plan, where I'm going to go. Hands is about operational planning, execution. Heart is the super hard thing. It's about actually developing leaders as people who are like truly empathetic, who do take the time to listen, who can actually like take feedback, so on and so forth. So organization who really want to change are people who will invest in that. They'll also invest in tools for employee resilience. And then last but not least, and Kunal touched on it, is actually like a set of interventions and programs. And they are not online training. They are not some of the interventions that we think is like check mark. I've done that, equity, diversity, and inclusion 101, and everybody understands what ED&I is. It's not that. It's actually creating the peer network. And when I say peer network, last thing I'll say is when you create, especially for visible minorities or any group of that matter, whether it's LGBTQ or women at BCG or whatever, don't just isolate them. Actually open up the dialogue for others to be joining in that peer-to-peer network. E for she, so, get the women together, but invite the men to join. Because the men do need to understand what, challenges these women, are facing that are unique challenges to them. So it's all about ongoing dialogue. It's a journey, multiple interventions. And yes, Kunal, we need more investments.
I love that. Very comprehensive and I think accurate. And in a perfect segue, I'd like to maybe go back to Ryan. But before I do, Kate Stone from our team said something in the chat that really just stuck with me about the stigma around mental health days. And she said, it's helpful to remind yourself athletes need rest days. And people need rest. You shouldn't have to get to a point of crisis for you to be able to take the time and say, hey, I need this to reset for me. And also everybody benefits. But you said something, Jen, about we have to take care of the people leaders. And I think, the adage of like, put your own face mask on before you can help others. But Ryan, I know you have a number of tools and practices that individuals use on a personal level. Could you maybe talk us through some of the tools that you've seen be most effective for people to kind of stay centered?
Yeah, I think, just making it part of your day. I mean, that's when I go into and give, these presentations, it's really like creating micro moments in your day to be able to check in with yourself. And, maybe as teams, how you doing, those sorts of things. And then taking that mindful moment for yourself and putting value on that as a company becomes so very important, because otherwise it's just a blur. Even if you have a meditation practice and you do it in the morning or you bookend it at the end of the day, what happens in between? We go on autopilot and we're not fully in our bodies. We're not embodied. We're not heart led. Our breath is probably pretty shallow because we're treading water, taking little sips of air, and that absolutely affects our nervous system and how we respond, or we react instead of respond, most likely. And so it's kind of just normalizing these micro moments throughout the day. And so I'll say to people very practically, put little reminders in your phone, check in, breathe. And sometimes you might dismiss them and swipe up, but for every time that you do that, it's going to bring you back to the moment. It's going to bring you back into presence, to stop what you're doing and put a lens on your beingness instead of your doingness. So these are little micro moments, and making that important instead of like, oh shoot, I got to create this whole practice. Now I got to do sound and I got to do meditation. It's just like, and I'll contort myself into a pretzel. All that stuff's very intimidating, and it's why people don't actually do them. So create the day when you're riding on the subway, take those deep breaths when you're getting to work, when you're in carpool with your kids. I too have 4 kids. I'm in that club, that people leader club. So it's creating those micro moments of wellness, those micro moments of mindfulness. And I think that becomes an easy pivot. But, our brains are etched. We have the neural pathways etched, and worry, do, create, produce. And so it's going to take a bit of coaching, self-coaching. That's the part. And also creating a scaffolding around yourself to be able to remind you that this is important to you. Because otherwise, this is a grabby time. Everything's grabbing at our attention. The news, your coworker, your to-do, all those things are grabbing at our attention, and our attention is so valuable. So unless we put importance, we put that spotlight on where we put our attention, and if it becomes important to you to be able to self-regulate, to be able to manage and self-soothe becomes so important. Because otherwise we're grabbing, like I did 20 years ago, at other things outside of ourselves. And that could be food, shopping, relationships, television, whatever that is, that has become center stage instead of coming back to yourself, returning to that place of calm and quiet, because you have it. We just want to grow it out. And like I said, it's not one size fits all, but it can begin with the breath. It can begin with taking 3 deep breaths when you notice you're holding. And sometimes my kids, I'll go like this, and they'll be like, what's going on? And I'll say, I just realized I wasn't breathing properly. And so it's just having the curiosity would be the first thing, and noticing your body language, noticing your breath, noticing if you're grounded or not, if you're in place or your mind is somewhere else, or you're in this flurry of activity and you're not connected. Genevieve mentioned beautifully about the heart and feeling connected to that. And I don't think companies speak about that enough. So I love that you brought that up, of being heart-led. And we can't be in the heart unless we're present in our body fully. So breath, sound, all these different modalities become useful. They become tools. It's not like the right way, but it becomes different ways. And one of my favorite ways to do this, because we all have busy minds, is tactile, sensory. I love emotional freedom technique that's called tapping. And veterans use it. Someone mentioned veterans. It was the only thing that worked for veterans who had PTSD when other things didn't. So it's a form of tapping on acupressure points on the body and repeating what's true for you. So that could be anger, worry, anxiety, fear, and tapping on these 9 points and speaking that truth out loud. So you're melding Chinese acupressure points and modern psychology. And it's just a beautiful way to bring yourself back into presence and also be honest about where we are, because part of the spiritual community and the wellness space is hijacked. That's the truth. It's, feel good, crystals. It's not that. It is not that. It is being present with yourself. It's being willing to look at what's running the motor underneath your engine. What gas you're putting in your engine. Is it do? Is it run to the next thing? How present are you? How can you slow things down? Because everything else is just a matrix that's being imposed on you, and it's not the truth. How you are experiencing, how you're moving through the workplace, parenting, and your life is what gives true value. So it's being willing to maybe do a pivot and say, how embodied am I in a day? And what tools could I pick up? How can I build my own toolbox to be able to try different things in the moment and being curious? What's going on for me? That's the first question I say to clients. What is going on for me in this moment? Instead of stop feeling this way, it's not okay. Instead of we're talking a lot about advocating for ourselves, which becomes really important. But first, before that, if we back it up, it's noticing what's going on for me. Where am I at? And to be able to do that, then we have to stop going. So I think a lot of times these mental health issues, things like that happen because we haven't hit the checkpoints before those, when the bottom drops out, so if we can get a little more awareness and we can support each other in checking in, again, getting curious and noticing what's true for us in a moment and not slapping on some, something. Yeah.
I think speaking of honesty, Ryan, I'll be very candid. Before we met in July, and I first heard you speak about self-regulation, self-soothing, etc., I was a real skeptic on meditation. And I really, I mean, my job is help organizations change. And I still think that's the bulk of the work needs to be creating the systems, the structures, etc. What really struck me, I started doing the micro moments. I felt like I had more agency. I'm like, okay, I want the world to change. I want companies to change. I want structures to change. This is something that I can do. And I did find myself as I, catching myself before the bottom, as you say, the bottom dropped out. And I kind of, when I checked in, I was like, okay, I can see it coming. Go take a walk, take the afternoon off, take a duvet day. I'm going to really, really pivot on a bit of a serious note, but I think it's a provocative question, but I think we have a really honest and candid panel. Let's talk about the geopolitical context. We've seen absolutely in our company, certainly across our clients, there's a lot of, conflict, violence going on internationally, even, verbal violence around elections, for example, that really manifest in certain people more than others. Some people who maybe came from a region that's been confronted with violence or have family still there. And maybe this is probably for Sulafa and Kunal. I've heard both of you speak about this, quite insightfully. How can we provide support? It's such a tough topic. It's such a tough time to confront. What can we do to support employees in that regard?
I was about to say, Kunal, do you want to start?
No, I insist you go first.
It's like, because it's a tough question. We're going to volley.
No. I'm happy to go first if you want. Sure.
From a practical experience, I think one of the things I often think about is that there's a lot of work about pleasure activism that people who come from context of marginalization have used song, dance, and many things to protest. And humor is one of the access points. So I find that a lot of employees are finding humor to navigate it. But that's one part of it. That's your self-management. That's the tools of self-regulation and those conflicts and those situations. I think that one of the things I think about is that these last 4 years have been continuous for people. Not only was there the global pandemic, there were also many moments along the way that have infringed on mental health for people historically, but there was more compounded moments. One of the things I think that has been interesting is really encouraging leaders to actually address it rather than ignore it. Often they tend to ignore it rather than say it, but you have to have intimacies, right? Like there has to be an acknowledgement. And I found that often the lack of an acknowledgement is also this idea that silence is also violence. The fact that you're not even actually addressing it, and it can be as vague or a recognition. It doesn't have to be politically aligned or anything. But I can say from my experience being an employee in a very big organization, I thought it was really interesting to be in a space during the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020 in the middle of a pandemic where most people who were impacted by the pandemic were racialized. And that is a fact, right? And then you have the compounding going to work and knowing not one person was actually addressing that, much like the police violence in the US, and nobody is addressing that. That is a systemic problem of just actually ignoring a life existence that still impedes on my well-being within the four walls of the organization and outside. And part of that is having courage, because if you do not address the totality of my experience, and this is not about bringing your whole self to work, but being able to check in intimately with your team is a real skill. And it actually is about bringing it forth. And I think that a lot of teams should be investing and organizations should be investing in that, because often what's happening is you have people, like there's pet to threat. There are all these other things and methodologies around intersectional experiences of people that are exiting roles because there's no acknowledgement of the actual things that are happening to them, right? And it's coming into workplaces. I don't think it's about addressing the issue. I think it's about acknowledging that there's a human experience, and that's the key. There is a human experience to geopolitical things. And it's not about the geopolitical thing, it's about the human experience.
I love that. It's an art, but it's a necessary art for leaders. Kunal, anything that you would... Oh, yeah, please, go ahead.
I think she said it, she hit on something that I always speak to, which is the perpetrator, collaborator, victim, and the bystander. The bystander is the fulcrum, right? Those who stay in silence are the ones that actually have the potential to end the perpetratorship that's happening in a situation. And I feel like, this goes very much in tandem with our intelligence versus our intellect. See, for example, if you heard a woman scream down a dark alley, instinctually you have two responses. One is preservation. Oh, wow. That too. Those balloons
Not
go
the most
off.
appropriate emoji for this conversation, but
The perpetrator is, attacking the victim. So your mind tells you to run away because you have to protect yourself. But your heart, and your consciousness says, I can help someone, and I should help them because they're in danger. And that's what we have, that extra intellect. And if we just tap into that extra intellect, then, with courage, which actually reminds me of my favorite quote, which has actually changed my life personally, which is, courage is not the absence of fear, but the judgment of something more important, like love and compassion will overcome fear. And the brave may not live forever, but the cautious do not live at all. So for me, this is really what she's talking to is, creating safe spaces, but also allowing for bravery in those safe spaces, because there's no point creating safety in a space for it to become stagnantly the same perpetratorship as it, or a new form of perpetratorship as it was before. What has to happen is you have to build, these traits, these attributes of courage, compassion, altruism, support, in order to actually try and lift all of us out of this conflict. We're talking about Gaza and Israel and Ukraine and Russia. Most of us are bystanders. Beyond, performance activism, which I respect to its own degree, there is no real transformative change happening right now. And I feel like that's what needs to really happen right now is we have to step up. We have to stand together. And I really believe that's the most important thing, is to have each other's backs and listen, be deep listeners to the suffering, and then find real ways in which we can help those that are suffering in silence or in reality. I'm not saying go into the war-torn territory yourself. That's pretty brave. But you can lend empathetic, compassionate support to those that are suffering in silence. And I feel that's the greatest epidemic of our time, the bystander effect. And I think the most important thing we can do is take a stand together to help those that are suffering.
so both of you, so powerful. I'm nervous to even follow up your remarks. But Sulapha,
No,
that was great. I want to bring it back to what now feels like a bit of an inane topic of the workplace. But that is what we're here to talk about, and it's such an important part of people's lives.
I
Jen,
think Jen is waving to the fact that she's got family duties coming, like a good officer, or duties
No,
coming.
I'll take literally 10 seconds, but I do have an Uber waiting outside. I'm actually on my way to Ottawa, and I'm meeting with the champion for visible minority for all of the Canadian Armed Forces. And I'm going to finish by saying, I love your remarks, Sulapha and Kunal. This man is the first Black man, the only Black man actually to become a flag officer in our Canadian Armed Forces. And you were talking about opening up the dialogue, like opening up the aperture, like actually promoting those who maybe actually have a little bit less of a voice, and which was his case for his entire career, and kind of like help them advance like through. So my favorite client going to Ottawa, if I don't leave right now, I'm going to miss my flight. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, everybody at Diversio, for the work that you're doing. Keep it up.
thank you, Jen. And I had no idea we had gone over time, so I will take the opportunity to wrap up the panel. What a wonderful way to end. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to those of you who joined and remained for the entire event. I know it's been a long day, but hopefully insightful, informative. I guess big thank you to our final panelists of the day, Kunal, Sulapha, Ryan. Jen, although she's signed off, really appreciate it. Very powerful. And thank you for your inspiration.